The most famous death in the ancient world has no body. The tomb is lost, the bones are gone. The one examination a pathologist needs above all else, an autopsy. Is one history simply skipped? Every physical trace of the woman has vanished from the earth. What survives instead is a story. A snake, a basket of figs, a queen on a golden couch, 2 servants dead beside her. It is one of the most repeated death scenes in human history, and almost every part of it falls apart the moment a pathologist looks at it. In the late summer of the year 30 BC, in a sealed chamber in Alexandria, 3 women died within minutes of one another. When Octavian's men forced the doors, all 3 were already gone. One of them was Cleopatra, the last ruler of Egypt. The Romans looked at her arm, found 2 small marks, and wrote down a cause of death that the world has carried for 2,000 years. A cobra did this. The problem is simple. A cobra fails this scene on every count. It fails on 3 women. It fails in that room. It fails in the time they had. The gentle, dignified death the world remembers is the one reading the evidence throws out first. What we hold and what we lack comes down to this. The subject is a biological female, aged approximately 39 years at death. Born in Alexandria in the year 69 BC, died in Alexandria in the year 30 BC. She was the last of the Ptolemies, the Macedonian Greek line that had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, and the last active ruler that kingdom would ever have before Rome swallowed it into an empire. Preservation, none. And that word is the first finding on the file. Every other body I would lay on this table left something behind. A skeleton, a wrapped mummy, a frozen traveler, a face kept soft by a bog. This one left the table bare. Cleopatra's tomb remains lost. Her remains have stayed missing for 2 millennia. The skeleton is gone. The tissue is gone. The last strand of hair that toxicology would need went with them, and every wound a ruler could measure vanished with the body. The most examined death in popular memory is, on the table, the emptiest case I have ever worked. We do what a pathologist does when the body is gone and only the scene is left. We rebuild the death from the outside in. The room, the timeline, the witnesses, the chemistry of what kills and how fast and how quietly, cause of death, mechanism, manner, time. We reopen a case. Rome closed in a single afternoon and closed badly. The record struggles to keep its own story straight. The Romans said a snake. Their own earliest surviving witness allowed for a snake or a poison and admitted that in truth, every living person was guessing. The death they all described, quick and quiet across 3 bodies at once, diverges sharply from the animal they blamed. The account the world inherited runs like this. After the sea battle at Actium in the year 31 BC, Cleopatra and the Roman general Mark Antony lost their war against Octavian, the man who would become the Emperor Augustus. Antony took his own life with a sword. Octavian marched into Alexandria on the 1st of August in the year 30 BC. Cleopatra, cornered in her own mausoleum with her treasure and 2 loyal attendants, chose death over being paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy. The most quoted version comes from the Greek writer Plutarch in his Life of Antony. Plutarch wrote roughly 130 years after the death. He was absent. Every person he interviewed was absent. He tells us that an asp, an Egyptian cobra, was carried into the chamber hidden under a layer of figs in a basket, that Cleopatra provoked it into biting her arm, and that she was found dead on a golden couch, dressed as a queen, with her 2 women dying at her feet. The two attendants had names: Iris, who tended the queen's hair, and Charmian, who had served her for years. By the account, when a Roman guard burst into the chamber and demanded whether this was a fitting thing to have done, Charmian answered that it was entirely fitting for the descendant of so many kings, and then she folded to the floor as well. 3 women, dead or dying, in one sealed room, inside the space of a few minutes. 2 other Roman-era writers built on it. Cassius Dio, writing more than 2 centuries later, added detail he could only have imagined. The Roman sources also report that Octavian, desperate to keep his prize alive, sent for the Psylli, a North African people famous for sucking snake venom out of wounds, to try to revive her. The image proved so useful to Rome that when Octavian held his great triumph, he carried through the streets a golden effigy of Cleopatra, with a serpent coiled on its arm. 2 small puncture marks on the skin. A snake in a basket. A woman who died looking like she had simply fallen asleep. That is the case file Rome handed down. For 20 centuries, the file stayed shut. There is a single detail in that scene that dismantles the entire snake story. It has been sitting in the account the whole time, in plain view, and almost every reader has walked straight past it. The chamber held 3 dead women. Walk through the animal first, because the animal is where the story breaks. The Egyptian cobra, Naja Haje, is a large snake. An adult runs between 1 and 2 meters in length, and big individuals push well past that. Concealing a live one of that size under a plate of figs, carrying it past Roman guards who had explicit orders to keep the queen alive and to prevent exactly this, and doing it while the snake stayed silent and still, sit somewhere between improbable and impossible. Then comes what the snake actually does when it bites. A cobra rations its venom. A defensive strike can deliver a dry bite, empty of venom, because the poison is metabolically expensive and the animal saves it for prey. Even a fully loaded cobra bite kills far too slowly for the scene the story needs. Egyptian cobra venom is primarily neurotoxic. It works by cutting the signal between nerve and muscle, and death, when it arrives through respiratory paralysis. That process is slow, and it is brutal. It unfolds across hours. It brings drooping eyelids, difficulty swallowing, vomiting, sweating, a creeping suffocation, while the mind stays wide awake. The bodies at the scene were described as composed, unmarked, at peace. Cobra envenomation leaves a body wrecked. Now the arithmetic that every ancient writer stepped around. 1 snake, in 1 chamber, was supposed to kill 3 grown women in close succession. A single cobra carries barely enough venom to threaten 1 adult. After a serious bite, it needs hours to build the supply back. To kill Cleopatra and both attendants, that 1 snake would have had to strike 3 times, land a lethal dose each time, and finish all 3 before the doors came down. A herpetologist reading that report would set it down and laugh. It runs against everything the animal is. I have stood at enough scenes to know a staged narrative against what a body actually does. I remember a woman in her late 30s who came through a county morgue in the Carolinas that I was covering. She had been found in bed, arranged, peaceful, the room in order. Every signal at the scene saying quiet, natural death in her sleep. The family had a story ready, and the story was gentle. The toxicology came back and told the opposite. She had taken a deliberate, calculated combination of drugs, enough to stop her breathing while she lay still, and someone had tidied the room afterward so the ending would read as kind. The peaceful scene was the point. It had been built to be read exactly the way everyone wanted to read it. That explains how a death can be dressed. It leaves open what actually killed the woman in Alexandria. For that, we turn to the one thing the snake story leaves blank and the chemistry can fill. A cause of death that is reliable across 3 people, that can be dosed and timed in advance, and that leaves the body looking asleep. There is a whole field of this, and Cleopatra lived inside it. In 2010, the German historian Christoph Schäfer, working with the toxicologist Dietrich Mebs, went back through the ancient accounts and the herpetology together and reached the conclusion a modern examiner reaches. The cobra fails. What fits is a plant poison, or more precisely a mixture of them, prepared by people who understood exactly what each one did. Their leading candidate was a blend built around opium, together with 2 of the most reliable killers in the ancient pharmacy, hemlock, and the plant we call wolfsbane, or aconite. Read that combination the way a toxicologist reads it. Opium is the sedative and the mercy. It dulls pain, brings drowsiness, and slows the breathing, so the person drifts toward death rather than fights it. Hemlock, the same poison that killed Socrates, drives an ascending paralysis that climbs the body and stills the muscles of respiration. Aconite throws the rhythm of the heart into chaos. Together, they do precisely what one snake could only pretend to. They kill predictably. They kill quietly. They work in a measured dose that can be prepared in advance and shared among more than one person at the same hour with an onset the preparer can time. 3 women, 1 preparation, 3 quiet deaths inside the same window. The chemistry does the work the reptile could only mimic. If reading bodies the historical record filed under the wrong cause is the kind of work you want more of, the subscribe button is where you mark this channel for it. The next case file lands soon. This is where the case stops being a puzzle and turns disturbing, because Cleopatra worked from data. The most chilling passage in Plutarch's whole account is the snake's rival. It is the sentence that tells us how she prepared. He writes that in her final months, seeing what was coming, she made a study of poisons. She tested them. She had condemned prisoners given various venoms and various toxic plants, and she watched them die, comparing which killed fastest and which killed with the least agony. She noted, according to the account, that the bite of the asp brought the gentlest end, a heaviness and a numbness, free of convulsion, free of any cry. Sit with what that describes. A methodical program of human experimentation run by the head of a state on living people for the single purpose of engineering the cleanest possible suicide. This was a queen with a laboratory and a body count, selecting a mechanism of death the way a clinician selects a procedure. Whatever went into that sealed room in the year 30 BC was chosen on evidence. Her own evidence, gathered by watching prisoners die in front of her. We weigh the 3 readings the way a pathologist weighs competing manners of death, one against another, on what the evidence will actually bear. The first reading is the ASP, cause of death, cobra envenomation. On the physical evidence, it collapses on every axis. Wrong animal for the concealment, wrong venom behavior for a reliable kill, wrong symptom picture for a body at peace, and mathematically hopeless across 3 victims from 1 snake. The 2 puncture marks that anchor the whole legend prove remarkably little. The fangs of a cobra sit a fixed distance apart and drive deep. A pin, a sharpened reed, a small blade dipped in a prepared poison leaves a pair of marks just as neatly, and the earliest source we have says exactly that. That earliest source carries real weight. Strabo, a geographer alive at the time of the death, who visited Alexandria within a few years of it, gave 2 possibilities and refused to choose between them. One was the bite of an asp. The other was a poisoned ointment. worked into the skin. Strabo, the closest contemporary source we have, held the question open. The certainty came later, from writers born long afterward, because a snake made a better story than a chemistry set. The second reading is self-administered poison. Cause of death: a prepared toxic compound, most consistent with a plant alkaloid mixture of the kind Cleopatra is documented to have studied. This reading fits the calm of the bodies, fits the simultaneous deaths of the attendants, fits a dose prepared and shared in advance, and fits the character of a ruler who had rehearsed her own method. It is the reading the physical evidence supports. The third reading is the darkest, and it earns a hearing. Some have argued that the hand behind the death was Octavian's, that he had her killed and staged the scene as a suicide. On the method, it is possible. Poison dressed as snakebite would look identical. But the motive runs backward. Octavian wanted Cleopatra alive. His entire plan turned on marching her through Rome in chains as the centerpiece of his triumph. A dead queen in a locked room robbed him of that. Her death cost him his single greatest trophy. On motive, homicide stands as the weakest of the three. The evidence points back to a death she chose and prepared. The medical answer stops short of where the story ends because the story kept moving after the body did. The formal finding, then, on a case with an empty table to sign over. Cause of death: poisoning. Most consistent with a deliberately prepared toxic compound, a plant alkaloid mixture of the type the subject is recorded to have tested, and set against the bite of an Egyptian cobra. The cobra is formally excluded as the agent of death. Mechanism of death: central nervous system and respiratory depression, with a probable cardiac component, driving a progressive and relatively painless loss of consciousness and then of breathing. That mechanism is what a combination built on opium, hemlock, and aconite delivers. It is the opposite of what a cobra leaves behind. Manner of death: on the balance of the evidence, suicide, self-administered, planned well in advance, and carried out alongside two attendants who died the same way inside the same short interval. I sign that manner while stating plainly that the case has no body to confirm it. Lacking remains, lacking toxicology, lacking a scene anyone recorded, manner rests on the reconstruction and on the documented character of the woman who died. It is the strongest reading the evidence will carry. It stops short of certainty, and a case missing its body stays that way. The category history filed this death under is death by serpent. A romantic accident of nature. A queen and an asp. The correct category is a prepared, studied, self-inflicted poisoning by a ruler who had rehearsed it on the dying. Rome refiled a clinical suicide as a fable, and the fable is what got carved into 2 millennia of paintings and plays. Rome had a reason to prefer the snake, and it is worth naming. A queen destroyed by an exotic Egyptian serpent flattered the new order. It cast Cleopatra as the foreign, decadent East undone by its own venom, and it spared Augustus the far more troubling picture of a sovereign so cornered by Rome that she engineered her own clinical exit and beat him to his prize. The golden effigy with the serpent on its arm, paraded through the Capitol, did the same work in bronze that Plutarch's basket of figs did on the page. The asp was propaganda before it was ever history. There is one last finding, and it is the one that unsettles me most as a man who reads bodies for a living. This is the only subject I have ever brought to this table who stays forever beyond examination. The pharaohs whose bones and wrapped bodies have moved through these case files each left a physical record that outlasted their empires. Cleopatra left the record blank. Her tomb was lost. Her body slipped away completely. Every conclusion in this file was reached without her, from the testimony of the people who defeated her. The search runs to this day. For more than 2 decades, the archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has dug at the temple of Taposiris Magna, west of Alexandria, convinced the joint tomb of Antony and Cleopatra lies somewhere beneath it. In 2022, she found a tunnel 4,300 feet long, cut 40 feet beneath the temple and running toward the sea. In 2024, her team recovered 337 coins, many of them bearing Cleopatra's face. In 2025, working with the deep-sea explorer who found the Titanic, she traced that tunnel out under the Mediterranean and found a sunken harbor, columns still standing 6 meters high on the sea floor. She has found everything except the woman. 20 centuries on, the most searched for body in archaeology remains exactly where the ancient world left it, which is somewhere still hidden. Rome finished the erasure. Weeks after the death, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, the boy the Egyptians had crowned as Ptolemy Caesar, was hunted down and killed on Octavian's order. The line of the Ptolemies ended with a mother who vanished into a lost tomb, and a son who vanished into a Roman execution. The dynasty that had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries closed, leaving a grave that stays hidden to this day. Which means the last thing the most famous woman of the ancient world did was deny the future its evidence. She studied death until she could command it. She chose the mechanism. She made certain the manner would be quiet. And then she slipped away so completely that the one thing a pathologist needs, the body on the table, is the one thing the earth has kept from us for 2,000 years. The asp was the story her conquerors could live with. The chemistry was the truth she carried out of reach. And the table, in this case, stays empty. If a death presented with 2 small puncture marks, 3 victims dead inside the same few minutes, a scene composed to look like sleep, a documented history of the deceased testing poisons on prisoners, and an empty table where the body should be, would you sign the manner as suicide, as homicide, or as undetermined? And would you dare to write the word snakebite at all? Tell me which line you would put first, and what those 2 marks on the arm actually prove. I read every comment. Thanks for watching.